The strongest Hokage in history versus the strongest Hokage of the modern era. Who was actually the strongest? Was Minato the man deemed to hold unrivaled strength and be unparalleled in talent that only Naruto could ever hope to surpass? Or was it Hashirama, a man spoke only through fairy tale with his cells alone, being called the ability of God according to Yamato's databook file? A man so strong that he actually beat the legendary Madara Uchiha in his prime with Kurama, which would be a feat Minato would follow up with in replicating with him beating up Obito Uchiha, who was under the name Madara several decades later. So with all of their lore and extremely stylistically opposing styles being taken into consideration, who rightfully would win in a battle for the greatest shinobi or greatest Hokage, Minato or Hashirama? Which for a majority of the series, there is a fan claim that Minato was the original Hashirama. With all of this part 1 hype he had, it kind of just went to no end, where basically every character who ever mentioned him couldn't seem to glaze him enough, and then all of a sudden it just fades away and we are introduced to a much similar level of hype upon seeing Hashirama's flashback fight against Madara, which was something mentioned by him through his entire bout against the 5 Kage, saying that Hashirama was basically untouchable, one who could heal wounds without waving a sign, something added to Hashirama's already impressive legacy as the ultimate shinobi. However, I come to disagree with the idea of Minato being retconned, and this is how even the Raikage, who proclaims himself to be the fastest shinobi in the world less than 40 chapters prior, was stating that Minato was the greatest shinobi to ever live, and that Raikage is now considered the fastest because the 4th Hokage is gone. Now, this is extremely important, as this is a rather self-absorbed individual stating that Minato, whilst Hokage, was faster than him, which not only gets confirmed 2 chapters later in the weekly release for the manga, stating that the 4th was even faster than Raikage, but also is practically stated in the 4th databook, which notes in relation to the Raikage that he boasts a godlike speed, not inferior to the Yellow Flash. Minato's databook panel sits alongside this very nicely, noting how Minato, fascinating even the elite of the other villages, was praised among all ninja as the greatest in godlike speed. The reason I bring this up is not only because how it kind of establishes similar wording for the speed relationship between Hokage Minato and V2A, but it also forces a distinction between Hokage Minato and Jonin Minato, which when combining both statements, you get that Minato is faster than the Raikage, who is greater than or equal to the Yellow Flash, which is consistent with other characters like C, who knows that the Raikage's nerve transmission is on par with the Yellow Flashes from Konoha, using the same Yellow Flash wording in reference to Jonin Minato, which is quite interesting, as this could mean that the Raikage boasted about being faster than the Minato who he used to battle, but the Hokage version was simply faster. Or it could just mean that C is a dumbass and simply doesn't know what he's talking about, which this theme has been something made consistent far earlier in the series as well, seeing as the 2nd databook notes how Minato worked on his command ability that he fostered in battle, implying that he's at least a smarter fighter whilst Hokage, which is probably just true. So even if you want to be disingenuous, Minato's intelligence and skill is much higher as Hokage than Jonin, even if the speed disparity is all not that large, since Yamato notes that Naruto does not have the 4th Lord skill yet. After B notes, he moved like the Yellow Flash, though this should be extremely conservative with all the evidence painting towards at least some disparity in speed between Jonin and Hokage, or even just the Raikage as a whole, which is also consistent with how the chapter 238 weekly release statement states how Minato had unrivaled strength, which would be just above the Raikage as well, and even Hiruzen as well, who also doesn't disagree with Minato being stronger than him now, with his age becoming more of a concern, with how Anko implies that Minato would have been able to actually beat Orochimaru if he were still here, and Hiruzen doesn't really disagree with him, but he kind of just holds doubt if he himself could even take on Orochimaru, or basically anybody in the village for that matter. This aligns with more supplementary material like the Storm Generations game, which claims to have canon cutscenes for at least the anime, in which they basically have Minato beating up Hiruzen for the title of Hokage, which could fit with the manga, as fighting for the title of Hokage is something common, such as how Madara fought Hashirama for it and Danzo fought Hiruzen for it, according to the Sakura Hiden novel. And I mean, we also know that Minato was a supervising Jonin for Hiruzen in the Chunin exam several years back, which regardless, the Hokage is generally considered to be the strongest in the village, and Hiruzen was seemingly relying on Minato during the Nine Tails attack, where Hiruzen is noticeably younger, having literally half the wrinkles from his Orochimaru fight, and likely much more powerful, as when Kabuto would state that Hiruzen is the strongest of the 5 Kage, he would be basing this off the reputation of the last time Hiruzen engaged in battle, being this Nine Tails attack here, meaning that Hiruzen's statement from Kabuto and the other 2 fanbook statements should certainly apply here as well, if not more so, placing Hiruzen above the 3rd Kazekage, who is the strongest Kazekage ever, and the 4th Raikage, who is stated to be stronger than even the perfect Jinchuriki 8 Tails, who, when weaker, without a host, was a rival to the strongest Raikage ever in the 3rd Raikage, and this would be probably at least until the 4th, making Minato at his time of Hokage above the strongest Raikage and Kazekage ever, and while the Mizukage and Tsuchikage are a little more ambiguous, Onoki should likely be the strongest as well, considering how even in his old age he clashed equally with Mu and the previous Tsuchikage, who Hiruzen and hence Minato would also be above. And I mean, bro, Yagura was pressed into using Biju bombs by Itachi's fireball alone, and was one shot with Amaterasu. This being the same Itachi who being a rival to Obito in some ambiguous way later, so Minato is certainly deserving enough to be placed in this conversation against Hashirama if it isn't clear. Minato is stronger than almost every single Kage in history, and this is without me even discussing his final fight with Obito, where Minato would go on to absolutely throttle Obito. And when I say throttle, I do mean it. I've heard many people try to argue that Minato and Obito are nearly equals, or even that Obito is faster, which simply isn't the case whatsoever. Even in their first interaction, Minato blitzed Obito's combat speed with his body flicker to then grab Naruto, which Obito planned on, hence the bombs being placed on Naruto's clothes, meaning that Obito knew Minato would outspeed him, and he set a precaution for when he did, which is quite consistent, as when Obito then tries to, off guard him from behind, Minato then blitzes all the way through Obito's head, where Obito can then catch his arm, and while this is impressive for Obito, it's probably not the golden ticket it's made out to be, as Minato may have just been slower since they can't touch each other physically, or he just may have slowed his momentum, as he wouldn't just spin around as fast as he can all the way around, and Obito simply caught him in that slowed state, which is very possible with how Minato then reacts to escape calmly with his FTG, and then notes that he can't even touch him because his intangibility. And to still give Obito his credit though, he does mention that he will take him in quicker next time, so this interaction kind of goes moot for both parties. However, once Minato transports himself to a field of kunai, Obito then appears, and Minato begins to realize what he needs to do to win. And with this, he needs to be cautious, and him being so alerted by this situation, seeing as he literally stated it's a space-time ninjutsu surpassing both his and Tobirama's, Minato then ran at Obito to where Obito was convinced of a consistent pace, to where then Minato does it again. He was simply much faster in the final moment as he planned on, noting that it all comes down to this split second in which Minato was faster, as even the weekly release statement for chapter 502 notes that Minato won the battle of speed, showing that Minato was only moving around with Obito to likely test his abilities and convince him of a consistent pace, for Obito to then, try to calm him, and then Minato could just blitz him and then slam him so hard with a Rasengan to where Obito's non-Zetsu arm actually falls off in the goo-like fashion, potentially implying that Obito was amped in this fight with extra Zetsu cells, even compared to when he would be a rival to Itachi, which we'll come back to maybe a little bit later though. I have heard that Obito is just definitely weaker, as the 3rd databook states that no one is capable of controlling the Nine Tails, which would just likely be because of Minato's separation seal though, as he actually does place that. And I also feel the need to bring this up, as I have heard a lot of people say that Obito lost to Minato because he's a stupid fighter and didn't even know the FTG mark was on him. And this is what's actually stupid, as Minato's seal marks sort of turn invisible if needed, as such as like the separation seal, which literally isn't visible on his cloak only a few pages after it is visible. So yeah, Obito is a smart fighter. It's just that Minato was smarter, so smart that he actually in fact scored the highest test exam scores ever, hinting at one of the most insane potential that Minato really did have for his generation, which would be highlighted in much greater detail at the age of 15 for Minato, as he would build a technique in the Rasengan to combat Biju and Jinchuriki alike, and he does exactly that by equaling out and overpowering Kurama's Biju bomb despite being fatigued, poison and having a gaping hole in his chest where he would still combat a Bijou Bomb several fold larger than the one Orochimaru stated would kill him, even though he just had his organs severed and placed back together, potentially implying that the amount of energy would literally just evaporate the strongest Sannin. Yet Minato in the worst condition was relative to one far larger than that, showing just how much of a prodigy Minato was at 15, which wouldn't even be his most paramount implication from this era, but rather that would be how Kurama actually implies that Minato is ranking alongside our god of shinobi friend here, Hashirama. And while many people being like Hashirama, Mito, Madara, and Minato, ranking alongside them based upon his combat ability to augment even a tetragram seal in his own style, and the tetragram seal is also just really impressive as well, as B basically concedes that the tetragram is far more solid than his own steel shell seal, which would be among probably the best sealing ninjutsu in all of Kumo, seeing as Gyuki's rampages literally killed the previous Jinchurikis and caused constant chaos. So in terms of what makes Minato special, being his sealing and speed, you could see just how impressive this would be for Kurama to witness at the age of 15, and why him saying that he just ranks alongside or is in the caliber of Hashirama probably isn't inconsistent, and it doesn't even place him above Hashirama, it's just rather not extraordinarily below him as many fans think, which would fit very consistently with Minato's performance in the War Arc, where he was reanimated 9 years following that point, where he was then shown outspeeding not just base Hashirama, but each of the first 4 Hokage to the battlefield, when Minato not only arrived there first, but arriving so much faster to the point where he can mark a rock offshore and teleport to a motion line covered kunai in front of Naruto, telling him to embrace for an impending explosion, where the bomb then relocates to offshore on that mark, showing how Minato likely just blitzed his own FTG transference speed, which, whilst also simultaneously placing 3 marked kunai in designated locations, yeah, it's pretty impressive. And then the main Hokage arrive at basically the same time, where Hiruzen would go on to compliment Minato's speed, with Tobirama also remarking that Minato's body flicker is even faster than his own, in which he implies with "You're quick at striking too," implying a conjunction between Minato's faster body flicker and striking speed, just showing just how impressive this is for Minato, seeing as he would just be faster than Tobirama, who's more than capable of body flickering to save a dazed Minato later, which means that base Minato could have also just done this as well, if not better, showing just how impaired Minato's mental state was at that point, despite being in KCM in the war. And if you're one to subscribe to Tobirama being faster than both Madara and Hashirama in their primes due to Madara's statement, though I'm not, then by all means, this would just imply that Minato is certainly above Hashirama in speed. However, I think it should be noted that Madara is making this claim, or when he's making this claim, it would have to be based upon the last time he saw Tobirama fight, which would have been during the Warring States, where Tobirama then blitzed his near rival and brother Izuna, and Madara only seeing the result, not the process, him concluding that Tobirama was faster than himself, or at least relevant in the conversation, would probably just be consistent, as Tobirama is capable of comboing and attacking with base Hashirama in both the War Arc and the reanimated battles against Old Man Hiruzen, and considering how Madara is likely much closer to Sage Hashirama and Taijutsu whilst alive, and Madara doesn't believe Tobirama is an equal match for him just prior to the Final Valley, I think it's fair to say that Tobirama, and hence Minato, isn't faster than Sage Hashirama or peak EMS Madara based on this. However, it would at least add consistency to Hokage Minato being at least faster than base Hashirama, as he also outsped him to the battlefield, so this is just kind of supplementary. Now, before moving towards Hashirama's ability, I think it should be quite clear by now that Minato is at least a match for Hashirama in some sense, and this isn't just a 10 out of 10 victory for Hashirama, despite his lore as the god of shinobi, and this godlike rhetoric has also been applied to Minato, as he was hyped up all the way through part 1, or not just part 1, but rather all the way through the War Arc, where Naruto would finally master the Nine Tails to beat Obito, as Minato once hoped, and Minato not only throttled that KCM 2 level opponent, but also was compared to KCM 2 Naruto by after that point, as Naruto then began to surpass him in certain attributes. ninja as the greatest in godlike speed actually stack up to the god of shinobi and first Hokage, Hashirama Senju. And despite the highest praise for Minato's speed, Hashirama, even prior to his titanic and arduous battle against Madara, he was the leader and head of the Senju clan, a clan known far and wide for their unrivaled strength according to the third databook, which further elaborates stating his skill in manipulating both wood style and tailed beast made Hashirama without peer in the shinobi world. And though Hashirama's physical strength is extremely impressive, it would be his wood style techniques that would be shown capable of literally grabbing and slamming a Nine Tails Bijuu Bomb into Madara Susanoo like a Rasengan, that the same Nine Tails, a little bit later, was literally capable of overpowering 6 other Bijuu Bombs at the same time, most of which could level continents, which is also consistent with Kurama's ability to potentially even have enough force to destroy the planet altogether, as some databook statements suggest. And yes, Minato also has techniques perfectly countering these same bombs. Minato's, though, would be his Flying Thunder God Guiding Thunder, which is literally stated to create a crack in space and time for the bomb to then be transported through and relocated to a designated location, where in Hashirama's case he kind of just grabs it with the hands of his wood golem to then slam it into Madara Susanoo, creating a massive explosion, literally dwarfing mountains and forest alike, like the one that Minato transported as well. Though, despite its size and sheer amount of force, Hashirama was fully protected in his wood golem, where he basically encapsulated himself, and this wouldn't be the only time Hashirama faced this monster, as he actually would face it another time, where he had to subdue it. And while many people think this is a flashback of the end result of Madara versus Hashirama's battle, this simply isn't the case, as Hashirama's armor and his entire left arm was severely damaged by one of Madara's attacks in Sage Mode or Baby Base, and Hashirama's face is only shown with scuff marks, whereas in this other flashback we can see many more gashes on Hashirama's face, and his armor, though, is still fully intact, meaning that base Hashirama likely beat up the Nine Tails, or fought him at least, and while he did sustain some damage, it is the full Nine Tails. I mean, what are we talking about? And Hashirama doesn't have the same stylistic advantage that Minato has against Kurama, where Minato just opts to utilize his Flying Thunder God and Body Flicker to completely blitz Kurama's strikes, saving Kushina, where he would then use his Flying Thunder God Ceiling again to then deal with the Bijuu Bomb, showing just how Minato also holds a similar stylistic advantage over Hashirama, who is also in this brawler type. In this aspect, though, which would align with Kurama's, statement from the one-shot, with Minato's speed and ceiling ninjutsu being something to make him of Hashirama's caliber, meaning that Hashirama's raw strength and Minato's speed and ceiling mastery are comparable in regards to dealing with highly destructive enemies like Kurama. So, how would Hashirama deal with not just Minato's, speed, but also his typical strategies he utilizes to begin his battles, such as like when Minato uses one of two strategies, the first one being his body flicker strategy, where Minato just body flickers to the opponent as soon as the battle begins, as shown against both Obito and the Iwa Nin to save Kakashi. However, another more common strategy for Minato would be him throwing a full range of kunai across the battlefield to give Minato the advantage of teleporting anywhere at any time, such as how when Minato battles at against A and B of Kumo, where he throws several kunai in all separate directions. He also does a similar strategy in Kakashi Gaiden when fighting several opponents at once, and we also do know that Minato likely does this in other fights as well, as seen as Minato tried to relocate away from Obito, and he directly relocated to a battlefield full of kunai. And you would also see something very similar for when B actually pictures Hokage Minato. He literally pictures a field of kunai. This is where Minato might hold the advantage, though, seeing as Minato opens his battles with kunai everywhere. And while I would concede that Hashirama would just destroy these or simply ignore it with his wood golem in the beginning of the fight, this is kind of bad, because Minato could just body flicker towards Hashirama and either mark him with an FTG seal or simply slice his head off, which is actually very plausible considering Minato's body flicker speed is far faster than Hashirama, and Hashirama in base actually has 0 quantifiable durability feats whilst alive. And we also know that, Hashirama shouldn't scale to Madara in terms of taijutsu here, as that's more so implied to be the case in Sage Mode, since the 4th databook makes note that Hashirama and Madara were nearly equals and that the difference between victory and defeat was paper thin. However, in regards to large-scale ninjutsu, Hashirama clearly held the edge, seeing as he smashed Madara's majestic attire into the ground. However, when noting they are equals in the databook, book, it actually points to a picture of their Kenjutsu clash in base, which was initially set off by Sage Hashirama engaging EMS Madara and Taijutsu, where we simply cut to this page of Madara being in much better condition than Hashirama, despite Hashirama's healing factor being verifiably active, as he does heal from Madara's bite wound earlier in the fight, which, coupling this with how Madara noted that Hashirama's healing factor was one of the pivotal keys to Hashirama that made him so powerful, it's then pretty clear that EMS Madara was relative to a Sage Hashirama in Taijutsu, or even superior, and Sage Hashirama was superior to Madara and Kenjutsu, making them hence equals. This kills two things, first being that Hashirama's durability scales to Madara, and second, that base Hashirama is as fast as EMS Madara's Taijutsu, and while Minato's durability is also unimpressive to say the least, it's much less crucial seeing as Minato is faster here and is commonly portrayed to blitz his opponents at the beginning of the battle. This is only one interpretation, however, as if you do really want to grant Hashirama the benefit of the doubt, then you could assert that Hashirama begins the battle in Sage mode, where the battle then becomes almost immediately a victory in Hashirama's favor, seeing as his raw durability and sheer taijutsu skills are very much relative to a prime Madara Uchiha, except he also gets the added bonus of potentially having sensory, as most sages do, and instantaneous access to his large-scale wood-style jutsu, and he could also just use these wood-style to kind of shield his entire body and still attack Minato, who albeit might still be able to react and dodge some of these attacks due to him being, able to mentally react and intercept a 5th step 8-gate guy. He just shouldn't be able to tank any of these attacks whatsoever, seeing as Minato's durability literally scales absolutely nowhere unless you subscribe to the argument of, well, since both Madara and Ten Tails Madara were in Sage mode, if they both weren't, then Minato might not get eviscerated by Ten Tails Madara's kicks. However, you couldn't tell, this argument's quite shaky, and then outside of that, you have Minato getting stabbed by a splinter whilst off guard, which might just prove fatal against the wood-style god, as I assume you could imagine. If he again starts in Sage mode though, I'd also just assume that his Senjutsu access is likely far higher, though he does have Senjutsu absorption in his base, seeing as Madara takes Senjutsu from base Hashirama, and it grants him the Sage face on his chest or whatever. This could also just allude to how Hashirama entered into Sage mode seemingly instantaneously against Madara, which is really telling. In Sage mode, Hashirama then could utilize several different methods of not just attacking Minato, but also uprooting many of his typical strategies by just destroying the ground where Minato's kunai would be placed, allowing Hashirama to not only gain the victory and edge in terrain, but it also just becomes what does Hashirama use to bring Minato down, where he could potentially catch him off guard with these hands, as he actually could just destroy all the kunai like that as well, being these hands that actually erect out of the ground, which were agile and powerful enough to catch Madara's majestic attire sword swing when angled at a top-down angle, which every other hand does seemingly it kind of gets chopped up and is basically irrelevant, seeing as Madara is able to completely 360 no-scope slice up every single one of these hands, along with all these surrounding mountains, and Minato could obviously just teleport away, seeing as he still might be faster if you subscribe to Sage Hashirama, or I guess Hashirama's Sage mode, amplifying more of his Senjutsu absorption and allocation, rather than his physical ability, which might be consistent, seeing as EMS Madara was able to fight equally with Sage Hashirama and Taijutsu, and could react to base Hashirama as well, and you'll notice that throughout the entire war, base Hashirama and Sage Hashirama were both relative to Edo Madara, basically the entire time, which I have also heard the argument that this could just be due to how Madara held back since he never used Tengai Shinsei or other large-scale Rinnegan abilities, but this is likely just due to those abilities either not working against Hashirama, being too chakra costing, or they could actually just result in Madara's battle not lasting as long, and he was clearly enjoying it, so by all means, I think saying that Madara held back due to this is probably just disingenuous, and hence Hashirama's base and Sage mode stats are likely relative, meaning that Minato could still be faster in terms of both their peak movement speeds with body flicker, and considering that Minato is able to utilize a speed-based transference technique in the Flying Thunder God, a jutsu that's stated in the second data book to be flight across space and time, a speed not even comparable to body flicker, and it's similar to the summoning jutsu, which is consistent with how it's also constantly implied to have a speed equation, whether that be from Minato outspeed his own FTG, or from how it's never once referred to as teleportation, but rather transportation through the entire Obito fight by both Minato and Kushina. Then, when you couple this with the databook's remarks regarding the guiding thunder, where it mentions a subspace that the object actually is sent through, you come to the conclusion that the FTG is probably quite similar to the Einstein-Rosen bridge, or wormhole theory, which is essentially a hypothetical topological shortcut through space and time, which, to avoid get too sciencey with it, as I do in my Minato vs. Tobirama video, I'll just say that it's probably something like a dot drawn on the opposite ends of a piece of paper, but this representing the, FTG seals. Then Minato, instead of traversing the entire paper's distance, he then can fold the piece of paper and then just travel the shorter distance between the 2 points instead, connecting those, as that is the subspace or whatever. Then this could also explain why it seemingly works over distances of countries at a time, such as how when Minato teleported away from 8 Gates Guy and all the way back to Konoha, where he always has his mark at. This grants us two things for Minato, being that Minato is certainly faster than Tobirama, though this is as Tobirama also uses the FTG, yet Minato is stated to have mastered his technique and brought it to a much higher tier of power, which would hence mean that if Minato mastered a speed-based technique, he'd also just be faster than Tobirama, who, when reanimated, notes that his clone's flying Raijin is just too slow and he needs Minato to join together with him, which is pretty telling for the fact that Tobirama's clones are too slow and Minato in base can outspeed his own timers, which again is also just consistent with how Minato could outspeed Tobirama to the battlefield and is implied to have better striking as well. And this is the same Tobirama who is more than capable of keeping up with a base Hashirama in terms of taijutsu, so if you don't think Hashirama's stats get buffed from Sage Mode, or at least that much, then it's basically a dinosaur in the fly scenario, except Minato likely has inferior stamina to Hashirama, and this shouldn't really come to a surprise to anyone, but like, Hashirama literally implies that his reserves are greater than even a KCM2 Naruto's reserves, whose chakra allocation is not only implied to have long surpassed Minato, but also basically everyone in the verse by that point. Even Naruto as a child had greater reserves than Kakashi, the strongest Jonin in Konoha, and it's not like, Hashirama is an idiot who will just be spamming his large-scale wood style, just draining his reserves for hours at a time, as he clearly has a tactical mind against Madara and when he led his entire Shinobi Alliance. So yes, even with Minato's potential speed advantage, Sage Hashirama either just outlast him, as Minato doesn't even use the FTG 10 times against Obito and the Nine Tails, and though Minato was fatigued, it still needs to be noted that even when Hashirama was fatigued, he literally entered into his giant, 1,000-hand Buddha statue, also his Sage Mode and whatnot, which likely won't even be necessary, seeing as his regular wood golems are relative to Madara's perfect Susanoo, whose power rivals all the Bishu, which is likely just consistent for Hashirama, as when Madara utilized Hashirama's Wood Dragon, you can see it's clearly superior to a KCM2 avatar due to its absorption and whatnot, meaning that any summon Minato utilizes like Gamabunta or any other toad would basically be virtually null against Hashirama, who could also just utilize his Flowering Trees technique, which is stated in the databook to literally be the highest level of wood style, with only those who actually have Hashirama's power could ever use. A technique that literally engulfs all the surrounding land to then bloom pollen out of the flowers to act in an almost paralytic fashion. However, this technique is also extremely deadly, seeing as Hashirama can still fight autonomously with it active and covering the battlefield as Madara does, where Hashirama then could utilize things like his Deity Gate to just drop down on Minato and hold him, where Minato might not even be able to escape, depending on how literally you take it actually suppressing the will of the victim. Or instead of the Deity Gates, Hashirama's, little minute wood dragon is also quite viable in simply holding Minato, seeing as it did hold Edo Madara as well. However, your interpretation of how much chakra this wood, could suppress is pretty important, seeing as Minato always has a mark on the Hokage rock, so he could just transport there and relocate back, but that's only if the chakra suppression isn't potent, isn't as potent as the Deity Gates or whatnot. I have also heard the argument that the Deep Force Bloom isn't a technique that Hashirama can use, and it's only because of Madara's extra abilities that this is made possible. However, I find basically nothing ever supporting this, and in fact the opposite, seeing as soon as Tsunade sees it, she states that's grandfather's, and then she also knows not to breathe in any of the pollen, so this was just a technique of Hashirama that was either probably in character or is potentially even so powerful that it was rumored along with the rest of Hashirama's godlike power, where it's just kind of written off as fairy tale in some instances, which, as you can imagine, would also just lead to this ability, not only being something consistently used in his arsenal, but also something so legendary for its time that it was written written off as myth due to how Hashirama possessed power even greater than Madara, according to Kabuto. And though Kabuto is wrong on a lot of his things, his knowledge on people's perception of Hashirama should hold some validity, which means that if Hashirama is in base, and Minato is also in base while Hokage, then Minato likely just holds the advantage. However, if Hashirama begins the fight in Sage mode, or if the match is simply Hokage Minato over Sage Hashirama, then Hashirama should just be able to overwhelm Minato, and even if we give Minato his Sage mode as well, make it, Sage mode over Sage mode, seeing as this really doesn't change much, seeing as, Minato never really once uses this in his literal death match with Obito and the Ninetales, and only uses it one time in the war, where he does note that he's not that good at it, despite being a complete Sage, and this could be due to a number of things, like Minato's Senjutsu buildup takes a long time, or he simply can't use it for long enough for the risk to actually be worth it, or simply both. Which also, his only real feats in Sage mode would literally just be that the fact that he doesn't die from Jubi Madara's kicks, which, considering Madara rarely ever engages in either kicks or punches after going into the Ten Tails, I don't really find anything to be extraordinary for Minato through this, and this could just potentially mean that Hashirama could just keep pressure on him until his Sage mode runs out and then just kill him, giving Hashirama the victory once again. And this leads us to our third and final matchup, being Sage mode Hashirama in his prime versus KCM2 Minato from the Fourth Great War, where I think the battle then leans very much so in Minato's favor when he's not mentally dazed. This Minato is more than capable of providing powerful support to BSM Naruto in what's called the strongest father-son combo, which is pretty telling, seeing as he could also move alongside him at a practically equal pace, their arms moving at the same speed to slam the Rasengan into Jibito, with both not only being able to deal with the other chakra hands, however, with Naruto's tail is seemingly caught by these hands, where Minato is shown knocking away two simultaneously, potentially implying some higher ends for Minato, considering base Minato was already also able to outspeed Hashirama, and Hashirama is much more comparable to a typical KCM2 Naruto via Edo Madara's interactions. It then becomes pretty clear how Minato is likely faster than Hashirama in this form, and now has the attack potency to actually crack Truth-Seeking Orbs, something that scales massively above even Tobirama's tandem paper bombs that bombed Hashirama's largest deity gate. Then coupling this AP with his now ability to literally teleport the entire alliance at the same time, it's then pretty clear that Minato's chakra reserves and strength now place him in a tier necessary for his speed to actually be as vital as it can be. Minato in KCM2, despite his massive speed and power amp, still gets access to every one of his abilities, even the more niche ones like the Guiding Thunder, as he actually does go to use it on an exploding Truth-Seeking Orb in the war, and all these abilities are also able to be utilized at a much greater capacity and frequency. It's basically unlimited KCM2 amped Rasengan, Flying Thunder God escapes, and Guiding Thunder diversions, and even extremely high level techniques like a potential surprise Bijou Bomb, or even though Hashirama's Wood style almost always grants him an advantage over QB users and Bijou users alike due to its suppressing properties, it should still be noted that even basic FTG kunai throw and slash techniques can still be implemented, seen as we know that with Minato, only in Sage mode, his kunai and teleportation are able to outspeed Kakashi's Kamui speed that was more than fast enough to completely blitz KCM2 Naruto and White Mask Obito nearly 60 chapters prior. And then you reimagine that, but with KCM2 instead of Sage mode, and you actually have clearly basic levels of attack being critical against Hashirama. Minato then being an Edo Tensei makes this all the worse, considering Minato could also just regenerate nearly any attack, and Hashirama's win cons through ceiling become much less available, and Minato could also rival and potentially capitalize on his sensory, which is something much improved from his base state, which isn't even something I noted in his previous versions, as his feats seem to be rather basic at best, just like Tobirama's, where they both kind of touch their fingers to the ground and sense 20 shinobi. But once in Edo with Kurama, he actually can sense from countries away Naruto. So to conclude the video as a whole, if it's base versus base, Minato probably wins. If it's Sage versus Sage, Hashirama definitely wins. And if it's KCM2 Minato versus Sage Hashirama, I think it's pretty close, but I would say that Minato probably wins. And yeah, that's all I really do have to say, but I am ultimately curious, what do you guys think? Did this video change your mind? Do you agree, disagree? Either way, make sure to let me know in the comment section below, as I basically read every single comment and respond to them. And yeah, as always, love you guys.